Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Intuitive Angling, and thanks a lot for swinging by the channel. Spend some time with me on the video. Always appreciate that. Hey guys, today we're going to give you all a jig fishing course, sort of for beginners or intermediate anglers, people that are just starting out with jig fishing. They can be intimidating a little bit, and there's a lot of ins and outs and a lot of variables to jig fishing. So going to give you guys a good foundation if you don't have a lot of experience with jigs, and even if you guys do have a lot of experience, maybe you'll pick something up here in this video. Also guys, just a quick invitation out there. Anyone interested in booking an on-the-water lesson with me, you can do that by going to my Facebook page, Randy Blockett Professional Angler. Just shoot me a private message. I'll get you all the info for that. And also, please hit that subscribe button if you guys haven't. That'd be much appreciated as well. Okay guys, jigs, for whatever reason it is, a lot of people that get started out in fishing, or people that have been fishing for a while, I find out there's a lot of an intimidation factor with jigs. It's like people, they're comfortable fishing, you know, creature baits and Texas rig worms and Cincos and that type of deal. But when it comes to jig, it's like I hear it all the time, it's like, I just can't catch many fish on jigs. And I think there's sort of like a mental block there a little bit, thinking that jig fishing is more difficult than what it is, but it's actually a very simple way to fish. And it's like, if you've ever caught a fish on a Texas rig worm or a creature bait with a Texas rig slip sinker, you can catch a fish on a jig because it's the same presentation. You work the bait the same way pretty much. There's no difference in it. The strike feels the same, hook set's the same, everything's the same, except for the profile of the bait is a little bit different. So what I want to do in today's video, we could do, and I've done on my long channel, Advanced Bass Fishing, I've done some hour-long seminars on jigs, but I want to give you guys a foundation that'll touch the most important parts of jig fishing if you're not real familiar or not real skilled in it, and maybe it'll help make it easier next time you want to try them out. First of all, jigs are going to work all year long. There's not a month out of the year that jig will not catch a fish. And they produce good fish that you can catch numbers on them. Most all the tournaments I've ever won in my life have come on jigs. They're a great lure for catching bass because they resemble a crawdad for the most part. They can resemble a shad on a swim jig, but we're just talking pretty much for pitching and flipping today. Now, there's a lot of different types of jigs out there. You've got your football head jigs, you've got swing head jigs, you got finesse jigs, you got pitching and flipping jigs, and casting jigs. But for today's video, I want to relegate it pretty much just to jigs that you pitch and flip and cast, which is how I fish a jig most of the time. So we can get into some of the other stuff in a later video, but we're going to get into the basics on it. So first thing, let's talk about color a little bit. Then there's color, you need, in my opinion, you need to keep a jig color pretty basic. You can experiment with different trailer colors. But the three primary colors that I throw are a black and blue set up like this, and then I throw a black and chartreuse like this, and then I'll throw a brown or some type of a green pumpkin like this, depending upon the water clarity. If I'm fishing water visibility that is dirty, like less than 12 inches of visibility, that's when I go to the black and chartreuse with a black trailer on it. Its silhouette's good, so this is a really good dirty watercolor. And also guys, I'll link all the jig stuff that you guys need in my Tackle Warehouse link in the description of this video. So if you guys want to go into that description and order your jigs and stuff through that link, it's a good way to support the channel too. But that's my dirty watercolor. And then the black and blue, it works good in dirty too, but it also works good in a little bit cleaner water. So the black and blue is my color for water visibility, like, you know, in that 1.5 to 3 foot range. And then if I'm fishing cleaner water, like water visibility of over 3 feet, I'm usually using some combination of a brown and green pumpkin. That's a really good setup with it. Now, anytime that I'm using like a brown jig like this or a green pumpkin jig, I've usually got a green pumpkin trailer on it. It matches really good, its silhouette's good, it's pretty subtle in the water, and this is probably one of my favorite jig colors. Brown and green pumpkin is hard to beat. Sometimes you can put a little chartreuse or orange dye on the tail, but this is probably the color I use more than anything. It's like a brown with a green pumpkin. Now, the color as far as the jig combination on a black and blue, I prefer a blue trailer. Now, I'll also link all the trailers in the description. This is the Zoom Big Salty chunk here. But when I'm using the black and blue jig, I'm usually using a blue chunk. There's just something about it that a blue chunk works really good on a black and blue jig. Sometimes I'll use a black, but most of the time I like a blue on there. It's just I've caught probably more big bass on like this setup right here, black and blue with a blue trailer than about anyone out there. And then on the black and chartreuse jig, sometimes I will use the blue trailer, but most of the time I'm using the black trailer for the maximum silhouette effect of that particular jig. Okay, so that's color. Another basic thing about weight size as far as jig. Most of the time I fish 3 different sizes of a jig. I'll fish a 1/4 ounce, a 3/8 ounce, and a 5/8 ounce. The 5/8 ounces are usually my pitching and flipping jig for heavier cover where I've got to penetrate over objects like over a bush limb or over a tree limb. The 3/8 ounce model is probably the most versatile. You can pitch it like around docks and around, you know, cleaner targets. It's a really good size. And then the 1/4 ounce size is the one I use for really shallow water. Say if I'm pitching stumps or something in less than 2 foot of water, get a nice slow fall with that. Also, the fall rate will have a little bit of an impact on the water as far as determining, depending upon water clarity and water temperature. In general, the dirtier the water, the lighter the jig I like to give them more time for the fish to get it. And the clearer the water, I like a little bit heavier jig for more of a reaction strike. And you really have to mix that up. The color, size, all that stuff is a determination of your cover that you're fishing, how hard the wind is blowing, and your water visibility. Obviously, also with jig size, if you're fishing on a real windy day, you may have to upsize, you know, your jig size just to be more efficient for the wind. Most of the time when I'm pitching and flipping a jig, I don't care if it's a 1/4 ounce, a 3/8, or a 5/8. I'm using anywhere between 17 to 20 pound test Seaguar and Vizex line. 20 is probably my favorite. If I'm fishing real thick cover, I'll use 25. And if I'm fishing like a lighter jig, like a 1/4 ounce jig around sparse cover, like isolated stumps or something, I may go to 17. All of them fished on a Megabass, the Alkali's flipping stick. Now, as far as the cover that you're fishing in a jig, it's the same deal like with the Texas rig worm. You fish a jig wherever you think the fish is going to be. Any type of shallow cover, docks, lay down trees, flooded bushes, grass, anything. You don't really have to be picky about the type of cover. It's just really what the cover is available on the lake that you're fishing. And if I could give you one tip on a jig as far as different than a Texas rig, you can catch fish just dragging a jig and just barely hopping it. But one of the things that I found out about jig fishing a lot of times is when you pitch that jig out there, if you pop it off the bottom a little bit harder than you would a Texas rig, like pop it off the bottom where, you know, it goes off the bottom maybe 12 inches or so and comes down, it seems like that will generate a strike, especially from the bigger fish, a little bit more than if you just barely drag it around. But the main thing is when you're fishing a jig, guys, is you gotta have a little bit of an expectation shift, because when you go to a jig, you are probably not going to get as many bites as if you were fishing like a creature bait or a plastic worm, because, you know, the size and profile of the jig, it's a pretty large profile bait, and the larger bait that you use in bass fishing, the fewer strikes that you're going to get. There's fewer fish that are willing to make the commitment on a larger bait. You know, a lot of different reasons. It's the mood and the personality of the fish. It's the size of the fish. You know, how much fishing pressure they have. If you have a lake that has a lot of fishing pressure in it, jigs are usually not that good. You need to be a little bit more finessey. But the main thing is when you do fish a jig, just dial back your expectations on your number of bites. Let's say if you're out there flipping boat docks with a Cinco or a Texas rig worm, and if you get 20 bites a day flipping that worm, you may only get, you know, 5 to 8 bites a day flipping a jig. But your 5 to 8 bites are going to weigh more than any of the ones that you catch on the Texas rig. That's sort of the sacrifice that you make with it. Another thing about jigs is that they're really good early and late in the day and on lower light conditions. They work good on bright and sunny days based upon, you know, the water visibility and the type of cover you're fishing. But a lot of times what I'll do is if I'm, say, pitching and flipping, I may start out with a jig for the first 2 or 3 hours of the day. And then if the sun gets up a little bit more, that's when I'll go more finessey. I'll pitch or flip a brush hog or a creature bait or worm. But usually the jig is what I start out with. I catch more fish on a jig, seems like, under those low light, early morning, late in the evening, cloudy, rainy days than I will on a Texas rig. But that's just a tip of the iceberg. There's a ton of other stuff we can talk about on jigs, but I just wanted to run that by you to give you guys sort of a foundation. If you're a beginner jig fisherman, don't know much about it, at least that will get you started. And then you can refer back. I've done a bunch of different jig videos. You can just go back to my playlist in my channel here and look up all the jig videos we've done in the past. So hope it helps out. We'll talk later.